terrifying punishments in ancient Egypt that women faced. History tried to bury them. Boats glided silently over the calm water, carrying bundles of papyrus, clay pots, and baskets filled with freshly harvested grain. The air smelled of mud, water, and the faint aroma of cooking fires as villagers began their day. Children ran along narrow dirt paths, laughing and chasing one another, while women carried jugs of water from the river, balancing them carefully on their heads. Life in ancient Egypt seemed peaceful and full of routine, yet beneath the surface of this beauty and order, a different, harsher reality existed, one that many women knew all too well. Women in ancient Egypt played many roles. Some worked in the home, tending to children and preparing food. Others took care of livestock, wove cloth, or helped in fields during harvest time. A few held special positions as priestesses or scribes, serving in temples or assisting in record-keeping for the pharaohs. Unlike in many other ancient societies, Egyptian women had certain rights. They could own property, inherit land or goods, and even divorce their husbands if needed. At first glance, this gave them an appearance of freedom and independence. Yet, while these rights existed on paper, the reality was often much harsher. Society was heavily shaped by traditions and male authority, and women who did not obey could face severe consequences. Daily life for women was a delicate balance. They were expected to fulfill their roles within the household and the community, to behave with respect and modesty, and to maintain the honor of their families. Even small missteps could attract attention or punishment. Adultery, theft, speaking disrespectfully to a male relative, or defying a husband's orders were all considered serious offenses. The rules were clear, but the punishments were terrifying. While men might also face consequences for breaking laws, women's transgressions were often punished more harshly. Their bodies, reputations, and social positions could be targeted as a warning to others. In a society that valued order and hierarchy above all else, women were expected to follow these rules without question. The Nile itself shaped much of daily life. Its predictable flooding allowed farmers to grow crops in abundance, and its waters were used for bathing, drinking, and washing clothes. Women often played a central role in managing these tasks, ensuring their families had enough food and water. At markets, women could be seen trading goods, selling food, or bartering for items they needed. Some were skilled artisans, creating beautiful jewelry, pottery, or woven textiles that reflected the culture and artistry of Egypt. Temples, too, offered opportunities for women. Those who became priestesses performed sacred rituals, prepared offerings, and maintained temple grounds. These positions brought respect and influence, but they did not protect women from the rigid expectations of society. Even the most revered women were not immune to punishment if they crossed certain boundaries. Despite these responsibilities, many women lived in constant fear. Stories of punishments, whether whispered in marketplaces or written in official records, reminded them of the consequences of defiance. Women learned to obey, to be cautious in speech and action, and to maintain appearances at all times. Even within families, a mother or grandmother would caution younger women about the dangers of stepping outside societal rules. "Do not anger the men," they would warn. "Do not draw attention to yourself. One mistake can ruin everything." These lessons, passed down through generations, shaped women's lives in ways that were both visible and invisible. Obedience was survival, and survival required vigilance. Historical records show that women's punishments were not limited to the private sphere. Some were public, designed to humiliate and warn others. Imagine a woman being led through the streets, her hair cut short or her body marked in some way, as the community watched in silence or whispered judgments. These punishments were meant to strike fear, to remind women that rules were absolute and disobedience would not be tolerated. Even if a woman had committed a minor offense, the social consequences could be severe. Reputation mattered immensely. A woman's honor reflected on her entire family, and losing it could mean social exile, difficulty finding a husband, or permanent shame. At the same time, there were women who managed to navigate this harsh world with skill and resilience. Some used their knowledge of law and tradition to protect themselves and their families. Others formed supportive networks with other women, sharing advice, helping in secret, or intervening when one of their own faced danger. The stories of these women are rare, hidden in fragments of texts or discovered in tombs and inscriptions, but they reveal the courage and resourcefulness that many women had to summon in order to survive. Life was not easy, but even in the shadow of punishment, women found ways to exercise influence and maintain dignity. Temples and monuments tell part of this story, though they often focus on the grandeur of pharaohs and gods rather than the struggles of everyday people. Tomb paintings show women in elegant clothing, participating in rituals, or offering food and flowers to the dead. These images give the impression of a harmonious and beautiful society. But when historians dig deeper into court records, letters, and legal documents, a different picture emerges, one where women's lives were tightly controlled and mistakes could lead to terrifying consequences. Many of these punishments were so severe that later generations of historians either ignored them or actively tried to erase them from memory. The voices of women, their suffering, and their courage were buried beneath the stories of kings and conquests. One of the most striking aspects of women's lives in ancient Egypt was the contrast between visible freedom and hidden danger. A woman might appear confident and respected as a mother, trader, or priestess, but behind closed doors, the threat of punishment always lingered. Her every action was observed and judged, sometimes by family, sometimes by the community, and often by officials. Laws were not always written in ways that protected women, and enforcement could be cruel and arbitrary. A single accusation could lead to public humiliation or physical harm. Women had to learn not only to obey the rules, but also to anticipate the reactions of those in power. Knowledge, caution, and resilience became their tools for survival. Even young girls were introduced to these lessons early. From the time they could walk, they observed the lives of their mothers, aunts, and older sisters, learning what was acceptable and what could bring punishment. Games and chores were not just play or work, they were training in obedience, social expectations, and careful behavior. Girls learned to carry themselves with modesty, speak with respect, and avoid actions that could draw negative attention. Education, for those who received it, often reinforced these lessons. Scribes and teachers emphasized the importance of loyalty, proper conduct, and awareness of one's place in society. These teachings shaped generations of women, ensuring that fear and caution were deeply ingrained. Yet, despite these limitations, women found ways to express themselves, to influence their families, and to leave their mark on history. Whether through small acts of defiance, clever use of the law, or quiet resilience, they created lives of meaning within a restrictive system. Some became advisors to powerful men, others managed households and estates with remarkable skill. Even when punishments were feared, women discovered ways to navigate society with intelligence and courage. Their stories, though often hidden or suppressed, reveal a humanity that persists despite harsh conditions. As the sun climbed higher over the Nile, the world of ancient Egypt came alive with movement, work, and ritual. Women moved through their days with strength and caution, balancing the demands of family, society, and survival. They faced challenges that were both visible and hidden, known and whispered. The beauty of the land, the richness of the culture, and the grandeur of temples coexisted with a system that could punish mercilessly. And yet, women endured, adapted, and sometimes even thrived, leaving traces of their lives for future generations to discover. This complex reality, the mixture of opportunity, restriction, beauty, and terror, shaped women's experiences in ancient Egypt. To understand their lives fully, one must look beyond monuments and official records, into the smaller, quieter moments of daily existence, into the hidden fears and small victories that defined survival. Life along the Nile was more than markets, festivals, and temple ceremonies. It was a world where women had to navigate invisible dangers, anticipate punishment, and find ways to assert their presence while remaining safe. The story of women in ancient Egypt is not only about what they could do, but also about what they could not do, and the courage they needed to live within these boundaries. History often prefers to remember the glory of kings and the majesty of pyramids. But the truth of women's lives, with all its fear, restraint, and hidden strength, tells a story equally important. It is a story of resilience, of navigating a world that could be both beautiful and terrifying, and of women whose voices were often silenced but whose lives were full of meaning, courage, and survival. As the Nile continued to flow, carrying with it the whispers of generations, these stories waited patiently to be uncovered, reminding us that history is never complete without remembering the lives of those who suffered in silence. Life in ancient Egypt was filled with rules, rituals, and expectations, especially for women. While the Nile brought fertile land, prosperity, and a rhythm to daily life, it also highlighted the strict boundaries within which women had to live. These boundaries were not always written on papyrus or carved into stone, yet they governed almost every aspect of a woman's existence. A young girl growing up in a small village might see her mother carefully measuring grains for the market, hear whispers of court punishments for those who broke rules, and learn that even a small mistake could bring shame or danger. From an early age, women were taught that obedience and caution were not just virtues, they were necessities. The legal system in ancient Egypt was complex, combining formal laws with social expectations. On paper, women had certain rights that were remarkable for the ancient world. They could inherit property from their parents, own businesses, and sometimes engage in trade. Women could also initiate divorce, a right that gave them some protection against abusive marriages. Yet these rights were often limited by custom, by male authority, and by the social stigma attached to challenging men. A woman might legally own land, but if a male relative or her husband disagreed with how she used it, she could be pressured or punished. Law and tradition were intertwined, and the lines between justice and control were often blurred. Social expectations shaped women's behavior as much as formal law did. Women were expected to maintain honor, loyalty, and modesty, both in public and private life. These expectations applied not only to actions, but also to appearances and speech. A woman who dressed in a manner considered inappropriate, spoke disrespectfully to a male relative, or questioned a husband's authority could face criticism, shaming, or even formal punishment. In some cases, social norms were enforced through public ceremonies or rituals that humiliated women and reinforced male control. The fear of public scrutiny encouraged women to follow rules carefully and to avoid drawing attention to themselves. Survival often depended on a woman's ability to anticipate the reactions of those around her. Adultery was one of the offenses most feared by women. Ancient Egyptian law treated sexual misconduct seriously, and women accused of adultery faced harsh consequences. The act was considered not only a personal betrayal, but also a threat to social order and family honor. Punishments could include public shaming, physical penalties, or exile from the community. Families often played a role in enforcing these rules, as protecting the family's reputation was seen as more important than the individual's well-being. Even unproven accusations could damage a woman's life forever, as rumor and social judgment often spread faster than legal proceedings. The fear of theft also affected women's lives. While both men and women could steal, women were sometimes punished more severely because their roles involved managing household goods and family resources. A missing item in a home or a mismanaged trade could lead to suspicion and accusations. In extreme cases, women faced forced labor or public humiliation for alleged theft, even if evidence was limited. This environment of constant vigilance meant that women had to be extremely careful in their actions, always aware of how their behavior could be interpreted. Disobedience toward male relatives was another serious concern. Ancient Egyptian society was patriarchal, meaning that men generally held authority over family, property, and public life. A woman who defied her husband, father, or brother risked punishment, which could range from verbal reprimand to more severe legal consequences. In some cases, women were accused of witchcraft or dishonoring the family if they openly resisted male authority. Fear of punishment reinforced obedience, creating a cycle where women learned from an early age that speaking out could be dangerous. This control extended beyond immediate family, as community members often reported or judged behavior that was considered improper. Education and skill played a unique role in women's lives. Some women became literate and worked as scribes or assistants in temples, gaining knowledge of laws, rituals, and religious practices. This education gave them a degree of influence and respect, but it did not always protect them from punishment. Even educated women were expected to follow strict moral and social codes. A scribe working in a temple could be punished for errors in recording offerings or failing to respect ritual rules. Education allowed women to navigate society with more awareness, but it also brought greater responsibility and scrutiny. Marriage was another area where social expectations heavily influenced women's lives. Marriage agreements were often formalized through contracts that outlined the responsibilities of both spouses. While women had rights in these contracts, including property ownership and provisions in case of divorce, the reality often depended on the husband's willingness to honor them. In some cases, women faced threats of abandonment, legal disputes, or family pressure if they tried to assert their rights. The consequences of challenging authority could be both social and legal, emphasizing the delicate balance women had to maintain. Even small actions could carry significant consequences. A woman's behavior in the marketplace, her choice of clothing, or the way she spoke to neighbors could be judged harshly. Gossip and rumor were powerful tools in maintaining social control. A woman accused of immodesty or disrespect could find herself isolated, publicly shamed, or subjected to formal punishment. Families and communities often acted as enforcers of social norms, and women had to carefully navigate relationships with others to protect their reputation and safety. Reputation was not just personal, it affected the entire family's standing in the community. The punishments themselves varied, but they shared common goals: to enforce obedience, maintain social order, and reinforce male authority. Some punishments were designed to be public, ensuring that others witnessed the consequences of disobedience. Public humiliation, such as forced exposure, parading through the streets, or marking the body in some visible way, served as a warning to others. Physical penalties could include beatings, confinement, or labor. Even if these punishments were not applied in every case, the threat of them was enough to shape women's behavior and instill caution from a young age. Interestingly, not all women were powerless. Some found ways to navigate these restrictions with intelligence, diplomacy, and careful observation. A woman might use knowledge of law, social influence, or family connections to protect herself or negotiate more favorable outcomes. Some women acted as intermediaries, helping resolve disputes within families or communities. Others used wit, charm, or careful planning to maintain independence or influence decisions. These stories are less visible in historical records, but show that women were not merely passive victims. They often exercised agency within the constraints imposed upon them. The environment of fear and restriction affected not only individual women, but also society as a whole. Families were cautious, communities were vigilant, and even the most routine aspects of daily life carried potential risks. Women learned early that survival depended on understanding social rules, anticipating potential dangers, and making careful choices. This constant awareness shaped culture, relationships, and personal behavior. It created a society in which obedience was rewarded, caution was necessary, and fear was an ever-present companion. Temples and religious practices reinforced social expectations. Women participating in rituals were expected to follow precise rules, both in behavior and appearance. Failure to comply could result in public reprimand or punishment. Religious law often intersected with civil law, adding another layer of complexity. While temples could offer women positions of influence and respect, they also demanded strict adherence to rules. This duality, opportunity paired with risk, defined much of women's lives in ancient Egypt. Despite the fear of punishment, women's contributions were essential. They maintained households, nurtured families, participated in trade, and assisted in religious practices. Their labor, skill, and intelligence supported the functioning of society. Yet these contributions were often overshadowed by the consequences of stepping outside prescribed boundaries. The tension between recognition and restriction created a unique social dynamic. Women were vital to society, yet their lives were closely monitored and constrained by rules designed to limit independence and maintain male authority. Stories of punishment were often passed down quietly in whispers or private lessons. A mother might tell her daughter, "Be careful with your words, watch your actions." One mistake can bring shame to the family. These lessons, learned from observation and experience, became part of the fabric of daily life. Women were taught not only how to act, but also how to anticipate the consequences of every choice. Knowledge, caution, and awareness became survival skills, just as essential as strength or skill in household tasks. Historical records that survived offer glimpses into this world. Court documents, inscriptions, and papyri reveal that punishments were real, deliberate, and sometimes severe. Yet these records often hide as much as they reveal. Many accounts focus on male officials or powerful men, with women's experiences mentioned only briefly or indirectly. The voices of women themselves are rare, buried beneath official accounts and monumental inscriptions. Modern historians and archaeologists work carefully to reconstruct these hidden narratives, using evidence from multiple sources to understand the challenges women faced and the strategies they used to survive. The legal and social restrictions in ancient Egypt were not static. They changed over time, varying between regions, dynasties, and social classes. Some women in wealthy families or positions of influence could navigate society with more freedom, while those in lower classes faced harsher scrutiny and greater risk. Nevertheless, certain patterns remained consistent. Obedience was expected, public shame was feared, and transgressions, real or imagined, were punished to maintain order. Across centuries, women learned that survival required both compliance and cunning, and that even small missteps could carry disproportionate consequences. In every corner of ancient Egypt, from the bustling towns along the Nile to the quiet villages tucked between fields, women lived within this framework of law, expectation, and consequence. Their lives were filled with labor, care, and skill, yet always shadowed by the potential for punishment. Obedience and vigilance were essential, not merely for success, but for safety and survival. And within this environment, Women developed resilience, intelligence, and resourcefulness, qualities that allowed them to endure, adapt, and occasionally thrive despite the limitations imposed upon them. Understanding women's lives in this period requires recognizing the dual nature of opportunity and restriction. On one hand, women had legal rights and could achieve positions of influence. On the other, these rights existed alongside severe social and legal consequences for disobedience. Daily life required constant negotiation between these two realities. The story of women in ancient Egypt is, therefore, a story of balance between authority and autonomy, risk and survival, obedience and personal expression. It is a story that reveals both the ingenuity and the vulnerability of women who lived thousands of years ago, in a society as rich and complex as the land along the Nile itself in ancient Egypt. The consequences of breaking rules were often severe, and women were not exempt. While the Nile and its fertile lands offered life and opportunity, society itself could be unforgiving. From a young age, girls learned that stepping outside the boundaries of acceptable behavior could lead to punishment. These punishments were designed to maintain order, reinforce authority, and remind everyone of the consequences of disobedience. They were not only physical but also social, psychological, and deeply humiliating. Understanding these consequences reveals much about the challenges women faced and the courage they needed to live each day. Some of the most feared punishments were public. Unlike private reprimands, public punishments exposed women to the scrutiny of the entire community. A woman who broke a rule could be led through the streets, forced to display her guilt in ways that humiliated her and reminded others of the dangers of disobedience. Public humiliation could take many forms, depending on the offense. In some cases, women's hair would be shaved or their clothing removed in part to mark them as offenders. This was not only painful and frightening, but also deeply embarrassing, as it attacked both their dignity and their social standing. Community members would watch, whisper, and remember the incident, ensuring that the lesson extended far beyond the woman herself. Physical punishments were another terrifying possibility. Beatings and floggings were common for certain offenses. These were not meant only to inflict pain, but to serve as warnings to others. Even minor transgressions could be punished harshly, as authorities sought to enforce rules consistently. Women's bodies were seen as instruments through which obedience could be demanded, and physical penalties were a way to demonstrate the consequences of stepping outside accepted norms. The threat of such punishments created a climate of fear that affected daily life, shaping how women spoke, moved, and interacted with others. In addition to public humiliation and physical punishment, women could face forced labor or confinement. Certain crimes, including theft or disrespect to authority, might result in a woman being sent to perform arduous work. This labor could involve repetitive tasks under strict supervision, often in uncomfortable or harsh conditions. The intent was both to punish the individual and to signal to the community that breaking rules carried real and tangible consequences. Confinement in small spaces, sometimes for days or weeks, also served to isolate women from their families and social networks, amplifying the psychological impact of the punishment. One of the most damaging consequences of disobedience was social exile. A woman who lost her reputation could be shunned by her community, barred from participating in social gatherings, markets, or religious events. Reputation was central to a woman's identity in ancient Egypt. A single accusation, whether true or false, could tarnish her honor and affect her entire family. Social exile was not only emotionally painful, but could also disrupt a woman's ability to earn a living, arrange a marriage, or maintain property rights. Fear of losing social standing reinforced obedience and created an invisible but powerful system of control. The punishments women faced often combined multiple forms of suffering. For example, a woman accused of adultery might be publicly humiliated, subjected to physical punishment, and then forced into labor or social isolation. The goal was not merely to punish the individual, but to reinforce societal norms and prevent others from committing similar offenses. This combination of humiliation, physical pain, and social restriction made the consequences of breaking rules deeply frightening. Women had to navigate daily life with extreme care, constantly aware of the potential repercussions of any action. Historical records provide glimpses of how these punishments were carried out. Court documents describe cases where women were accused of theft, disobedience, or moral transgressions. Punishments were carefully recorded, indicating that authorities took these matters seriously. Inscriptions and tomb paintings, while often focused on grandeur and religious rituals, sometimes allude to women's suffering. Archaeologists and historians have pieced together these fragments to understand how widespread and severe punishments could be. Even small details, such as marks on bones or references in papyri, help reveal the lived experiences of women who faced these dangers. Religious and moral expectations often amplify the consequences. Temples and priesthoods played a role in maintaining social order, and women participating in religious activities were expected to follow strict rules. Failure to do so could result in reprimand or punishment. A priestess who made a mistake during a ritual, or a woman who disrespected sacred customs, risked not only social censure but also legal consequences. Religion and law were intertwined, creating an environment where obedience was enforced both spiritually and socially. This added pressure made it clear that rules were not optional, they were central to the functioning of society itself. Even within families, the threat of punishment loomed. Fathers, brothers, and husbands could enforce rules through verbal discipline or formal reporting to authorities. Family honor was deeply important, and women were often held responsible for maintaining it. A young girl might be warned about the consequences of improper behavior in quiet conversations, or through examples of older women who had suffered. Mothers and grandmothers taught these lessons with care, emphasizing the need for caution, respect, and vigilance. While these lessons were meant to protect, they also reflected the harsh reality of living in a society where missteps could be dangerous. The psychological impact of these punishments was profound. Women lived with the knowledge that their every action could be judged and punished. Fear of accusation or rumor influenced how they moved through the marketplace, how they interacted with neighbors, and how they managed household affairs. Constant vigilance became a necessary skill, as even minor errors could escalate into serious consequences. The emotional weight of this fear was a daily companion, shaping decisions and behaviors in subtle but powerful ways. Survival required both awareness and careful navigation of social norms. Despite these dangers, some women demonstrated remarkable resilience and ingenuity. Many developed strategies to avoid punishment or mitigate its effects. They learned how to negotiate with authorities, how to maintain social networks for support, and how to use their knowledge of law and custom to protect themselves. Women also formed bonds with one another, offering advice, assistance, or protection in times of need. These networks were essential for survival, providing both practical help and emotional support. Even in a society that imposed strict rules, women found ways to exercise agency and influence outcomes. Punishments for women were not only a matter of law or tradition, they were also a tool for maintaining the broader social structure. By demonstrating the consequences of disobedience, authorities reinforced male dominance and social hierarchy. Women's suffering was often public and symbolic, serving as a lesson for the entire community. The visibility of punishment made it clear that rules were non-negotiable, and that obedience was expected not just from one individual but from all. This system, harsh as it was, contributed to the stability of society while simultaneously limiting the freedom of women. In addition to legal and social penalties, shame played a central role in controlling behavior. Shame was not only personal but familial and communal. A woman who was shamed publicly could affect her family's reputation, reducing opportunities for marriage, trade, or social participation. Even minor offenses could have lasting consequences if they became known within the community. Women learned to carefully manage appearances, to speak respectfully, and to follow rules meticulously. This focus on reputation and honor was both protective and constraining, shaping lives from childhood through adulthood. While punishments were frightening, they also reveal the complexity of ancient Egyptian society. Women's lives were governed by a combination of law, custom, and expectation, with each reinforcing the other. Punishments were not arbitrary. They reflected the values and priorities of the culture, emphasizing social order, family honor, and adherence to tradition. Understanding these practices helps modern readers appreciate both the challenges women faced and the strategies they used to survive. Life was not only about obedience, but also about navigating a web of social, legal, and moral expectations with intelligence and caution. Historians and archaeologists have worked to uncover these hidden stories. By studying court records, papyri, and archaeological evidence, they have reconstructed the experiences of women who lived under these conditions. These stories, often overlooked in traditional histories, reveal the harsh realities of life for women and the courage required to navigate them. Each record provides a glimpse into a world where obedience, fear, and resilience were central to survival. By piecing together these fragments, researchers have brought to light the experiences of women whose voices were long silenced or ignored. Even though punishments were harsh, women contributed significantly to the functioning of society. They managed households, cared for children, assisted in trade, and played roles in religious practices. Their labor and skill were essential, yet they were expected to perform these duties under constant scrutiny and threat of penalty. The tension between necessity and control defined women's daily lives, requiring a combination of skill, intelligence, and caution. In this way, the story of punishment is also a story of resilience, demonstrating how women navigated a challenging and often unforgiving world. The legacy of these punishments is complex. On one hand, they show the ways in which society controlled behavior and maintained order. On the other, they reveal the hidden strength, intelligence, and resourcefulness of women who lived under these conditions. Life in ancient Egypt was not only about survival, but also about understanding the rules of society, anticipating risks, and finding ways to live meaningfully within strict constraints. The fear of punishment shaped choices, relationships, and daily routines, leaving a lasting imprint on the lives of women across generations. By studying these experiences, we gain insight into the challenges women faced and the courage they demonstrated. Their stories, often hidden beneath grand monuments or erased from official records, are essential to understanding the full picture of ancient Egyptian society. Women's lives were shaped by rules, restrictions, and consequences, yet they persisted, adapted, and sometimes even flourished despite these limitations. The harsh punishments and public humiliation they faced were part of a broader system of control, but they were also part of a story of endurance, strategy, and resilience that continues to inspire and inform our understanding of history today, even as ancient Egypt built its magnificent temples, monumental tombs, and vast cities. The stories of women's suffering were often hidden beneath the grandeur. While pharaohs and gods were celebrated in inscriptions, hieroglyphs, and public monuments, the harsh realities faced by women rarely appeared in the records that survived. History in many ways was written by those in power, and the voices of women, especially those who suffered punishments or endured restrictions, were largely silenced. For centuries, the full scope of their experiences was lost, obscured beneath tales of glory, conquest, and divine favor. Yet when one looks carefully at the fragments of evidence left behind, a different story emerges, revealing the struggles, resilience, and courage of women who lived in an unforgiving society. Many of the records that survived were created to glorify rulers, temples, and the wealthy elite. Tomb paintings, stelae, and inscriptions often showed women as idealized figures, graceful, obedient, and supportive of men or gods. These images presented a society that appeared harmonious and just, leaving little indication of the dangers and punishments that women actually faced. For the most part, women's suffering was either minimized or completely erased. The emphasis was on beauty, piety, and social order, rather than the harsh realities that many women endured daily. This selective recording created a distorted view of history, one that celebrated accomplishments while ignoring the costs paid by ordinary people, particularly women. Court records and legal documents, though fewer in number, provide glimpses of a more difficult reality. These documents reveal that women could be accused of crimes such as theft, adultery, or disobedience, and that punishments were often harsh. Yet these records were not widely shared or displayed, and many were lost over time. Scribes and officials carefully controlled what was recorded in public spaces, emphasizing the successes of rulers and the stability of society rather than exposing the suffering of women. In this way, the stories of punishment, fear, and resilience were gradually buried, leaving only fragments for later historians to uncover. Archaeologists and historians have worked tirelessly to recover these hidden stories. By studying papyri, court records, inscriptions, and even the layout of homes and neighborhoods, researchers have begun to piece together the realities of women's lives. Small details, such as references to fines, labor assignments, or public reprimands, reveal much about the consequences of stepping outside societal rules. Marks on bones and objects suggest physical punishments, while patterns in burial practices hint at social exclusion or diminished status. These discoveries provide a window into experiences that were deliberately obscured, offering a more complete understanding of how women navigated a society that could be both beautiful and harsh. One of the most striking aspects of these hidden stories is the resilience women displayed. Despite the risk of punishment and social judgment, many women found ways to assert themselves, protect their families, and maintain some level of influence. Some women became skilled in the legal and social systems, learning how to navigate disputes, negotiate property rights, or advocate for their children. Others used their intelligence and resourcefulness to survive under oppressive conditions, forming supportive networks with other women or quietly challenging unfair restrictions. These acts of courage often went unnoticed in official records, but they reveal a strength and determination that endured even in the face of fear. Religion and spirituality also played a role in women's lives, offering both support and additional challenges. Women could participate in rituals, serve as priestesses, or assist in religious ceremonies, gaining respect and influence in their communities. However, religious law and practice could also reinforce social control. Mistakes or transgressions in ritual behavior could lead to punishment or public shame. Temples were centers of power, and adherence to religious norms was essential for maintaining social order. Women who navigated these religious spaces successfully had to balance devotion with careful observation of rules, understanding that failure could have serious consequences. The social context of ancient Egypt amplified the impact of punishment and restriction. Communities were close-knit, and news traveled quickly. Rumors, gossip, and social judgment could spread fast, affecting a woman's reputation and opportunities. A public reprimand or accusation could have long-lasting consequences for both the woman and her family. Even minor offenses could result in diminished social standing, difficulty in arranging marriages, or exclusion from important communal activities. Women had to manage not only the rules of law but also the expectations of their communities, balancing personal survival with the well-being of their families. In many ways, the erasure of women suffering from history reflects broader patterns of power and control. Those in authority, whether pharaohs, priests, or wealthy landowners, shaped records to emphasize their achievements and the stability of society. Women's voices, especially those who had experienced punishment or resistance, did not fit this narrative. Their struggles were inconvenient for a history designed to show harmony, prosperity, and divine favor. As a result, many of these stories remained hidden for centuries, waiting for modern scholarship to uncover them. The gaps in historical records are reminders of the selective nature of history and the importance of careful research in bringing lost voices to light. Despite the challenges, some evidence has survived, allowing us to reconstruct aspects of women's experiences. Letters, petitions, and legal documents show that women actively engaged with the systems of authority, advocating for themselves or their families. Tomb inscriptions occasionally reference women who managed property or played roles in temple administration, highlighting their agency despite societal constraints. Archaeological discoveries, such as household items or personal belongings, provide further insight into daily life and the pressures women faced. Each piece of evidence contributes to a more nuanced understanding of how women lived, worked, and survived in a world that often tried to silence them. The process of uncovering these hidden stories also reveals the creativity and resilience of historians and archaeologists. By examining multiple sources, comparing inscriptions, and interpreting subtle clues, researchers can reconstruct the experiences of women who lived thousands of years ago. These efforts shed light on the complex social structures, legal systems, and cultural expectations that shaped women's lives. They also highlight the courage and determination of women who navigated these challenges with skill and intelligence, even when their stories were deliberately ignored or suppressed by history. Modern studies emphasize that women's experiences in ancient Egypt were not uniform. Social class, geographic location, and family status influenced the degree of freedom or risk a woman faced. Wealthier women or those with influential families might navigate society with more ease, while poorer women often faced greater scrutiny and harsher punishments. Nevertheless, certain patterns were consistent. Obedience was expected, public shame was feared, and deviation from rules could result in social, legal, or physical consequences. These common experiences shaped the culture and daily life of women across the country, creating a shared understanding of the risks and responsibilities inherent in their roles. Even in the face of erasure, women's stories persist in subtle ways. Oral traditions, fragments of records, and archaeological evidence preserve glimpses of their lives, struggles, and accomplishments. These stories remind us that history is not only about rulers, monuments, or victories, but also about the ordinary people who lived, worked, and endured within complex social systems. Women's resilience, courage, and intelligence are essential parts of this history, offering lessons about survival, strategy, and the importance of uncovering hidden voices. By studying these experiences, we gain a fuller understanding of ancient Egypt and the people who lived there. The erasure of women suffering from history also has a powerful emotional impact. It reminds us that many voices were silenced, and that the stories of courage and struggle often went unrecognized. Women endured fear, punishment, and social restriction while contributing significantly to their families and communities. Their labor, intelligence, and care were vital to the functioning of society, yet their hardships were often ignored in official narratives. Recovering these stories allows modern audiences to honor their resilience and recognize the complexity of life in ancient Egypt beyond the monuments and public celebrations. By examining these hidden stories, we also gain insight into the ways societies control behavior and memory. The selective recording of history, emphasizing rulers, elites, and public achievements, often omits the challenges faced by ordinary people, particularly women. Punishments, restrictions, and social pressures were essential to maintaining order, but they also reveal the human cost of societal control. Understanding these dynamics helps us appreciate the courage required for women to navigate such a system, and highlights the importance of uncovering and preserving voices that were once silenced. The story of women in ancient Egypt, with all its hidden struggles, offers both lessons and inspiration. It teaches us about resilience, courage, and the strategies people develop to survive in restrictive environments. It also reminds us that history is never complete without including those whose experiences were ignored or suppressed. By piecing together the fragments of evidence, modern scholars give voice to women whose lives were once invisible, revealing a richer and more complex picture of society. These stories show that even in the face of fear and oppression, human strength, intelligence, and perseverance endure. In the quiet corners of temples, in the shadows of grand palaces, and in the daily routines of villages along the Nile, the lives of women continued despite the risks. They managed households, tended to children, participated in religious rituals, and engaged in commerce, all while navigating a system that demanded obedience and punished transgression. Their courage and resourcefulness allowed them to survive, even as history often ignored their struggles. Today, by uncovering these hidden stories, we can appreciate not only the beauty and complexity of ancient Egyptian society, but also the resilience of women who lived and endured within it. The lessons from these stories are timeless. They remind us that history is shaped by those who hold power, but truth can be uncovered by careful study and attention to detail. Women's experiences in ancient Egypt show the importance of resilience, strategy, and community in navigating difficult circumstances. They also remind us to listen to voices that have been silenced, to seek out hidden histories, and to honor the courage of those who lived under oppression. In uncovering these stories, we reclaim a fuller understanding of the past and ensure that the lives and struggles of women are remembered alongside the triumphs and achievements of their society. As the centuries passed, the grandeur of ancient Egypt remained, from the soaring pyramids to the majestic temples, yet the stories of ordinary women, those who lived, worked, and struggled along the Nile, often remained hidden. Life for women was shaped by rules, restrictions, and social expectations, yet their resilience and courage shone through in small acts of survival and determination. By understanding the lives of these women, we gain not only a clearer picture of society, but also a deeper appreciation for their strength in the face of fear and adversity. Their stories, once silenced or buried, remind us that history is richer and more complex than the monuments alone suggest. Women's lives in ancient Egypt were full of responsibilities. From dawn until dusk, their days were filled with work, preparing food, tending to children, managing household affairs, and supporting extended family members. In addition, many women contributed to the economy through trade, craftwork, or services in temples. They were skilled at weaving, pottery, cooking, and other crafts that were essential to daily life. While these tasks were often physically demanding, they were also opportunities for women to assert their abilities, demonstrate competence, and gain respect within their families and communities. Even as society imposed restrictions, women found ways to excel and make meaningful contributions. Yet, despite their skills and contributions, women had to navigate constant risks. Social expectations were strict, and failure to adhere to them could have serious consequences. A woman might be punished for theft, disobedience, or sexual transgression, even for something that today would be considered minor. The punishments, as explored in previous parts, ranged from public humiliation to forced labor or social exile. These risks shaped women's behavior in every aspect of life. They learned to anticipate dangers, manage appearances, and interact carefully with neighbors, family members, and authorities. This constant vigilance required intelligence, strategy, and awareness, all of which became essential survival tools. Family played a central role in women's lives. Mothers, grandmothers, and older sisters taught young girls the rules of society, warning them of the dangers of disobedience, and emphasizing the importance of reputation and honor. Fathers and brothers often enforced rules within the household, creating a system where women's behavior was closely monitored from childhood onward. While these lessons could be strict, they also provided guidance and protection. By understanding the boundaries of acceptable behavior, women could navigate society more safely, avoid punishment, and protect their families' standing. Knowledge, caution, and prudence became as valuable as skill or strength. Religion added another layer to women's experiences. Temples were not only centers of worship, but also hubs of social and political influence. Women who served as priestesses or participated in religious ceremonies gained status and respect, yet they were expected to follow strict rules and rituals. Mistakes in religious duties could lead to reprimand or public censure. At the same time, religious participation provided opportunities for women to gain influence and to form connections with other members of the community. Balancing devotion, skill, and adherence to rules required intelligence and careful attention. Religion was both a source of empowerment and a framework of control, reflecting the complex realities of women's lives. The resilience of women in ancient Egypt is evident in their ability to adapt to these challenges. Despite the risks, women found ways to maintain independence, protect their families, and exert influence. Some women became skilled negotiators in legal matters, successfully advocating for property rights or fair treatment. Others developed strong social networks, supporting one another in times of need and offering advice or protection. Even in restrictive environments, women exercised agency, demonstrating courage, ingenuity, and determination. These acts, though often unrecorded, highlight the remarkable ability of women to navigate a society that demanded obedience while also providing opportunities for meaningful engagement. Education played a key role in this resilience. Literate women, though relatively rare, could read and write, participate in temple administration, and manage household accounts. Education provided knowledge, awareness, and a degree of influence. A literate woman could interpret legal documents, record transactions, and communicate effectively with authorities. Even when society imposed strict limits, education offered tools for survival, negotiation, and empowerment. It also allowed women to preserve knowledge, engage in culture, and leave subtle traces of their existence for future generations to discover. The fear of punishment, though constant, shaped women in ways that strengthened their resolve. They became careful observers of social norms, understanding both the letter and spirit of the rules. Their actions were deliberate, calculated to avoid unnecessary risk, yet they also found creative ways to assert personal choice and protect their families. In this sense, the very restrictions that limited women also fostered resourcefulness, strategy, and courage. Living with risk required mental and emotional strength, qualities that were often unrecognized in historical records but essential to survival. Archaeological evidence reveals glimpses of these hidden lives. Objects found in homes, inscriptions in tombs, and fragments of papyri offer insights into daily routines, legal disputes, and personal struggles. These discoveries show that women's lives were complex, combining domestic responsibilities, economic contributions, religious duties, and social navigation. They reveal a society that was both structured and flexible, where women exercised skill, intelligence, and courage within the boundaries of law and custom. Even when punishments were feared, women found ways to endure and sometimes to thrive. The erasure of women suffering from mainstream history makes these discoveries even more significant. For centuries, historians focused on pharaohs, wars, and monumental architecture, overlooking the experiences of ordinary people. Women's lives, particularly those of the lower or middle classes, were often ignored or minimized. Yet modern research, archaeology, and careful interpretation of surviving records have allowed these hidden stories to emerge. They show that women were active participants in society, navigating risks, exercising skill, and contributing to cultural, economic, and religious life. Their resilience is a testament to human endurance in the face of social and legal constraints. Even in the realm of social expectations, women demonstrated adaptability and wisdom. They carefully managed relationships, reputation, and appearances, understanding that personal safety and family honor were intertwined. Gossip, rumor, and social scrutiny could be as powerful as formal punishments, and women learned to anticipate and mitigate these risks. By mastering the subtleties of social interaction, they could navigate complex communities and protect themselves and their loved ones. This skill was not passive. It required intelligence, observation, and strategic thinking, all of which highlight the agency women exercised in their daily lives. The legacy of these women is remarkable. Despite centuries of erasure and selective recording, traces of their lives survive. Modern historians, archaeologists, and scholars have reconstructed elements of women's experiences, revealing the full scope of their resilience, courage, and intelligence. These stories challenge simplistic narratives of ancient Egypt, showing that society was not only about pharaohs, gods, or monumental achievements, but also about the ordinary people whose lives were rich, complex, and often difficult. Women, in particular, navigated a delicate balance of duty, risk, and survival, leaving a legacy that continues to inspire and educate. Reflecting on these lives, we see that courage was often quiet and subtle. Women displayed bravery not by wielding weapons or commanding armies, but by managing households, negotiating disputes, and surviving under constant scrutiny. They balanced obedience with intelligence, care with vigilance, and fear with strategy. In a society where missteps could lead to punishment, women found ways to maintain dignity, protect their families, and exercise influence. Their resilience and skill were as remarkable as any public achievement, even if history largely ignored it. The story of women in ancient Egypt also teaches us about the power of remembrance. By uncovering their experiences, we challenge the selective narratives of history and give voice to those who were silenced. These stories remind us that history is not only about rulers and monuments, but about the lives, struggles, and accomplishments of ordinary people. Remembering women's courage, intelligence, and resilience allows us to see society in its full complexity and appreciate the contributions of those who were often overlooked. In the end, the lives of women in ancient Egypt were a mixture of opportunity, challenge, fear, and resilience. They managed households, contributed to the economy, participated in religious life, and navigated complex social norms. They faced risks, punishments, and restrictions, yet they also demonstrated intelligence, strategy, and courage. Their experiences were largely hidden by history, but modern research has brought their stories to light, revealing the richness and complexity of their lives. These women remind us that survival, resilience, and agency often take quiet forms, and that their contributions were essential to the functioning and success of ancient Egyptian society. Even as the Nile continues to flow, and the monuments of ancient Egypt stand as symbols of human achievement, the hidden stories of women endure. They remind us that history is never complete without including voices that were silenced, struggles that were buried, and lives that were lived under both beauty and fear. By studying, remembering, and honoring these experiences, we gain a fuller understanding of the past and a deeper appreciation for the courage and resilience of women who lived thousands of years ago. Their legacy is not only historical but timeless, offering lessons about perseverance, wisdom, and strength in the face of challenges that remain relevant even today.